Welcome to BizTech's Investor Conversation Show. Now, this show is part of our partnership with the Malaysian Business Angels Network. And our guests today are Sam Shafie, the CEO and co-founder of PitchIN, and Tunku Danny Mudzaffar, the founder and CEO of microLEAP. Now, the focus of today's show is really on the rise of alternative financing to fund the needs of the new economy. Now, during the conversation, we're going to take a closer look at the new investment landscape, the increase in uptake of equity crowdfunding as an alternative route for funding of startups and companies in Malaysia, and we'll take a deep dive into peer-to-peer financing as well. Now, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Now, for a start, I'm going to give each of you a little bit of airtime to share with us what your companies actually do. I'm going to start with Sam.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Shafie. I am the CEO and co-founder of PitchIN. So we are one of the 10 licensed registered platform that offers equity crowdfunding in Malaysia. So we started way back in 2016. To date, we have successfully assisted 140 companies to raise more than 245 million ringgit. So that's a bit about the company PitchIN.
Okay, Danny, over to you.
Hi, my name is Tunku Danny. I'm the co-founder and CEO of microLEAP. So microLEAP is a Sharia-compliant and conventional P2P or peer-to-peer financing platform. So how it works is if you're looking for financing, instead of getting money from the bank, you can get 100 people to fund your business. It's a debt instrument, so different from PitchIN in terms of their equity. But we have successfully funded about 28 million ringgit worth of financing, anywhere from your micro enterprises all the way to your small and medium enterprises.
All right. Thanks for the intro, gentlemen. And I'm going to now drill down a little bit into each of your businesses. Now, Sam, could you take us through the evolution of equity crowdfunding in Malaysia?
Right. Thanks, Brian. So we started way back in 2015. So that was the year when 6 of us, the original 6, were given a license to operate an equity crowdfunding platform in Malaysia. The first ever platform to go live was sometime in December 2015. Unfortunately, Brian, we started off not that well. The first ever campaign for equity crowdfunding failed, actually. And to be honest, all of us were quite worried because we had really a negative start to the industry. PitchIN went live in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, sometime in March or April 2016, and our first campaign was successful. In the beginning, Brian, I think the market was trying to get a feel to equity crowdfunding, how it works. It was the first ever equity crowdfunding regime in ASEAN. So a lot of people were observing how it will work in Malaysia. The first 2 years was a bit of struggle, and I think that's the reason. The main reason was because a lot of Malaysians were not that too aware and knowledgeable about how equity crowdfunding work. So those 2 years was really about education, about educating not just the investors, but also the founders and companies in terms of looking at equity crowdfunding as another way for them to fundraise. Prior to this, all of us know that companies would either go to look for grants or raise money from VCs. And equity crowdfunding was a new product which everyone were not very well versed and aware. Now fast forward to 2022, it has matured a bit. Having said that, Brian, I think there is still a lot of work to be done, especially in terms of educating the greater Malaysian population. I think Tunku Danny would agree with me that largely the education of alternative fundraising, such as P2P and ECF, is much more concentrated in the Klang Valley, Penang, JB landscape. I think there is more to be done for the greater of Malaysia.
Now, Sam, one of the interesting things about the ECF industry per se is the fact that equity crowdfunding has probably taken off after the slow start, as you mentioned, far better in Malaysia compared to the rest of the region. Why has that been the case?
It has, Brian, and in what we're quite proud of the work, not just at PitchIN, but also our peers, the other 9 ECF platform. I think all of us have carried the burden of going out there, educating not just founders and companies, but also the investors. Now, why I think Malaysia has performed much more better than our neighboring countries in terms of equity crowdfunding is the involvement of retail investors. If you compare that to our friends in Singapore, and I had a very interesting discussion with a quite prominent Singaporean VC who came down to Malaysia wanting to have coffee with me. And the sole aim of that particular investor was really to understand why equity crowdfunding have picked up so well in Malaysia comparable to Singapore. And I told the VC that it's really because of the retail investors' involvement in these deals. Equity crowdfunding is really the best way for you to get your most fervent supporter, fanatical client to actually invest in you. And they in return will then be able to then convert other people to also invest in your company.
Because they become your ambassadors, right? They become first your customer, then your investor,
yeah.
then your ambassador.
You know what, Brian, it's really interesting because now we see people paying companies to be an investor at the same time doing groundwork for them in terms of educating other people about their products and their services. So we've done quite well in that sense. And that's why I think we've performed much more better in terms of equity crowdfunding comparable to our neighboring countries.
Now, what do you think is the principal attraction for ECF among startups and businesses? Because again, there's a better uptake in Malaysia compared to, say, Singapore. Is that because in a Singapore context, it's easier to raise money from VCs and angels?
Yes and no, Brian. I think when we look at equity crowdfunding, you'll probably be looking at more early stage companies, companies who are probably not ready yet in terms of raising money from VCs. And that's where we saw the gap in terms of fundraising, not just in Malaysia, but also in other countries. One of the things that if you were to observe how the Securities Commission started equity crowdfunding was to allow companies to raise up to 3 million. In the beginning, the thesis was that these are where most companies fail to gain traction because they were unable to raise funding from VCs at that particular stage. We've now gone beyond the 3 million or 5 million max to 20 million. Now the market has matured that the SC has now seen even VCs participating in deals. So now we've been able to attract much more mature companies who are looking to raise more than 5 million, more than 10 million. And with that extended amount of money allowed by the SC, we now see even VCs coming in to co-invest with the crowd, right?
And so, Sam, this is an interesting phenomenon because then with the Securities Commission of Malaysia basically broadening the hurdle up to 20 million. That is quite a substantial amount of money. That comes to 4 million plus US dollars. That's right. Quite interesting. So have Malaysian ECF providers been able to attract companies from overseas to come here and raise capital?
That has not happened yet, Brian, for the simple reason that the regulators do not allow foreign companies to raise funding on an equity crowdfunding platform in Malaysia. So those companies need to be incorporated in Malaysia. Hopefully one day, the regulators among ASEAN will work together to open up their shores to allow a listing in respective countries. Hopefully, both Tunku and I would live to see that happen one day, to see companies in Singapore listing in Malaysia and vice versa, right? So right now, it has not happened because of the regulations per se, but that's something that, again, we're looking forward to happen one day.
Thanks for that, Sam. I want to zoom in now on Tunku Danny. Could you give us an overview of the P2P financing sector in Malaysia and walk us through that journey?
Yeah, so the P2P financing industry started a year later from ECF, 2016. Initially, there were 6 operators as well, and then they opened up a second round of P2P operators in 2018, 2019. So we were the second batch that were given licenses by the Securities Commission. We were go live in October 2019, and from then on, the market has 11 P2P operators in Malaysia. In terms of the size of the market, the P2P financing landscape has dispersed over 2 billion ringgit, which is around 500 million USD into micro and small medium enterprises, and it's growing at a very fast rate. It's made up of different types of financing, from your invoice financing, which is the majority of the financing, to car
dealer factoring, right? That's traditional factoring. Okay.
Traditional factoring, car dealer financing. You've got your micro financing and your term financing.
So your car dealer financing, is that financing individual vehicles, or is that floor stocking to basically stop the
fall? It'll be floor stocking. A majority of what you find, the investors in the P2P financing space, they prefer short-term investments.
So when you say short-term, how long is that?
So we're talking 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. So the car dealer financing is when a second-hand car dealer needs to buy a car and get financing for 3 months. They sell the car and they pay back the financing within 3 months. It's very short term, very quick, and that's why this growth has grown exponentially. But we also do term financing as well. So these majority go up to 3 years. Is the maximum tenor for most of the term financing you get here.
So in terms of the SME loans itself, what sort of ticket sizes are we looking at?
It changes from the micro enterprise side, anywhere from 10,000 ringgit per investment note, but can go up to 1 million and 5 million ticket sizes for the bigger names. So you do get some well-known SMEs coming in. Under Securities Commission, you are not allowed to finance a public listed company or a subsidiary of a public listed company. Okay. So you do get some top tier SMEs coming in looking for short-term financing. The reason they like us as opposed to banks is because the speed of funds that you get. So okay. On average, it takes about 2 weeks. Banks maybe takes about 3 months.
Okay, interesting. So 2 weeks. So that's a very significant advantage over the traditional bank. Could you give us a sense of how much of market share that the P2P industry has taken away from traditional banks and financing institutions?
Yeah, so as the term is alternative financing, I think P2P financing will always be alternative. If you look at the more developed countries, alternative financing accounts for about 20% of the financing landscape, while in Malaysia, I think the BNM did a study, is anywhere in the region of 3 to 5% of the financing landscape. So there's still a lot of growth there to be made, but it will always be alternative. We'll always, if you cannot get a bank loan due to stringent credit terms, then you go to look at alternative financing sources. Doesn't mean we just onboard the worst credit you can, but for example, banks need 3 years in operation before you can get financing from a bank. While for the alternative players, that especially the P2P financing companies, normally it's minimum 6 months to 1 year, then you get financing from us.
Yeah, and this is a very good way then for young companies to build up credit history.
That's right, very much so. So obviously, you build up credit history with a P2P financing operator. It will be in your credit bureaus, your CTOS, your experience will have that credit record, and then you can go to a bank to get the larger financings.
And the two sides of the equation, on one side you have the SMEs and companies who are looking at financing, but what does your investor profile look like?
So for microLEAP, we're a majority Shariah compliant financing. So in terms of financing dispersed, about 99% is Shariah compliant, 1% is conventional. Our investor base is made up mixture of actually both Muslims and non-Muslims. Mm-hmm. Reason is a lot of our non-Muslim investors believe in the ethical nature of Shariah compliant financing. They know that if they invest in an investment that's Shariah compliant, it's not going to be for an alcohol company, not going to be for a tobacco company or gambling company. So they like the fact that they're investing in something that's ethical in nature. And then it's the whole mixture. Majority are young tech-savvy investors who have disposable cash, who know how to use a smartphone, and we do get retirees who need a little bit of hand-holding, but they have a smartphone which they can use readily.
Now, what sort of default rates has the industry been experiencing in general?
There's a big spread. The highest default rate is about 9% default rate.
Wow, that's very high.
That's one of the P2P operators. But the average market is between 1 to 3% default rate.
So 1 to 3% is a very acceptable number, I think, from a financing standpoint. But is that 9% an outlier, or are there others in that sort of category as well?
No, I think that 9% is an outlier. And the strategy for P2P financing if you're an investor is to spread your risk. So never put your full investment onto one company. You can spread your risk across multiple companies. So if one defaults, you can take the hit because you spread the risk over, say, 10 companies that you're invested in.
Now, what have been default rates or fraud rates among some of your platform partners, for example?
We don't divulge any fraud rates, but there has been instances of that happening for sure. So for me, the credit checking is key for all P2P operators. You need to really understand the company, know that it's an actual company. Under Securities Commission rules, they have to be set up under SSM, or Companies House of Malaysia. So that gives at least some form of a netting in case anything bad happens. But you have to do your own due diligence. Really go into the numbers of the company. Find out who is the ultimate beneficial owner, and look at the bank accounts that they have. Are they a real company? So we have to be very careful of fraud. It does happen, but it's very few and far between.
Now, I want to switch over to Sam now. As we talk around regulation and compliance within both industries itself, the P2P financing and ECF, because you're regulated by the same people. What are your thoughts on the regulatory framework at the moment? Because obviously Bank Negara was in the forefront in the region in terms of licensing equity finance, crowdfunding, as well as P2P providers. How is that landscape looking like, Sam, today?
Right. I think our regulators, especially the SC, who's regulating myself and Tunku Danny, I think we have one of the most forward thinking in terms of people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Having said that, regulators, as we all know, are quite stringent in terms of compliance and due diligence. And that's because they need to protect investors. So to ensure that platforms like PitchIN and microLEAP, we are subjected to stringent compliance and due diligence. I'm not sure about Tunku Danny, but we have gone through our own audit by the regulators ourselves. Not fun, Brian, as you can imagine. But that's something that we expect to happen. The first few years was what we can say the honeymoon years, because we're new, we have to get our act together. But after 5 years, the regulators expect that every platforms have in place all the due diligence, compliance, not just in terms of policies, but also the team and people that are able to run due diligence and compliance work on not just companies who are fundraising on the platform, but also investors who are putting in money into these companies. So to your question, I think we have one of the most adaptable, not just in terms of what we are currently seeing, but also in the future. Why I say that is that if you were following the SC in terms of how it's developing this particular market for the unlisted companies, you've seen that after introducing equity crowdfunding, P2P financing, they're now going forth to introduce other products such as the initial exchange offering, where later companies can then raise funding and not give equity away, but also offer tokens to their investors. So as much as people complain about regulators being slow, I think we all need to understand who they are representing. Their utmost what they call objective is to ensure that there is stability in the market, that investors are protected along the way. And having said that, I myself am very happy with the way we are engaging with the regulators and how they're actually developing this market.
Now, Danny, your thoughts on regulation and compliance?
Yeah, just to clarify, so ECF and P2P is regulated under Securities Commission, not Bank Negara. So I think Securities Commission is very forward thinking. They do have this registered market operator, which is a list of digital operators, which include ECF, P2P financing, also DAX operators, digital asset exchange operators, so that you can invest in cryptocurrencies, the like. And as Sam said, you know, IEOs are coming in, even initial coin offerings are coming in soon. So you can see the Securities Commission is really pushing this digital front and allowing lots of products and services, but in a very regulated manner. I think the great work that Securities Commission did was they regulated the industry, but did not regulate too much that it stifles innovation and, you know, us bring it forward. You know, you have the always examples in China where there was hardly any regulation in the P2P financing space, and, you know, billions and billions of dollars was lost because it wasn't regulated. And then in the end, China banned P2P financing overall in the country. So Malaysia has done a great balancing act, especially the Securities Commission, and I'm very proud to be regulated by them.
Now, Danny, I want to move on to microLEAP and your thoughts on industry expansion as well as microLEAP's expansion moving forward. Where do you see the opportunities for you as well as the industry?
So I think for us, we started just focusing on micro enterprises. We're now moving into the Shariah compliant SME space. So we do invoice financing and soon launching our own Shariah compliant car dealer financing. But having said that, we are first looking to really establish ourselves in Malaysia. As Sam alluded to, majority of the P2P financing operators and ECF are focused on Klang Valley. No one is really looking outside of Klang Valley. And in fact, microLEAP was the first P2P financing operator to have a borrower or issuer in every single state of Malaysia. Okay. So we are actually focused on going outside. We want to help the small companies in Sabah, Sarawak get financing, Kelantan, Pahang, Terengganu, all those kind of places is really what we want to target. After that, we will go to, regionally looking at places where they want Shariah compliant financing, Middle East or Indonesia and places like that.
Now, how about you, Sam? What do you see the outlook for the ECF industry now that the pandemic is over? Are you seeing a takeoff again, or what are your thoughts for you and the industry?
Right. So Brian, so 2 years back when we had the first ever lockdown MCO, I think all of us were a bit worried about the sudden change of not being able to go out, meet people, have physical sessions. And you know what? The last 2 years have been great. Everything has been online, but the numbers have picked up so much in the last 2 years. Now we're back to having physical sessions, and now people are now busy with their lives. They can't really spend a lot of time virtually talking to, listening to people pitch, right? So we've now gone back in a way that people are now trying to adjust what they were so used in the last 2 years to going back to what they were before. Now, if you ask me right now in 2022, since we've now gone back to what we knew of in 2019, the market seems to have been adjusting itself, right? From that last 2 years of just virtual sessions through either Zoom or Google Meet and so forth. So, so in terms of our own numbers at PitchIN, we've seen some adjustments here and there. People are getting used to go back, trying to balance this virtual plus physical, what are called sessions. And we've seen that not just at PitchIN, but also observing the entire market. I think the future do hold a positive, what I call, positively for ECF. What we need to do, and we've alluded this a couple of times, is really to enlarge the task of educating and creating awareness to the larger Malaysian population, and not just focus on the big cities within the west side of Malaysia. Moving forward at PitchIN, recently we just received the approval to actually list also Sharia compliant companies. So we will now be introducing Sharia companies on the platform. We were also given the approval to run the first ever secondary market for equity crowdfunding companies in Malaysia.
And that's very important, isn't it? Because so for the first time now, investors don't have to wait years for an exit. There's some element of liquidity for their ECF investment.
You know, Brian, I think that's a game changer and something that we've been wanting to do for the longest time. You're very correct that one of the major challenges for equity crowdfunding, especially for investors, is really the exit, comparable to what Tunku Danny and the peers in P2P do. A short-term loan that is 3 to 6 months, investors get their money back plus some within that short period of time. Whereas for equity crowdfunding, it's more patient investing. And that's why we really want investors to know what they're getting themselves into. Having said that, after a year or 2 years, some investors do want to exit, but there is no way for them to exit. We have facilitated private deals behind the scene, Brian, but now with the secondary market, it will be more open, and I think we'll be able to attract not just people who want to sell, but also people who probably did not manage to invest in this particular company, but see them now improving. Numbers are much more better, and they now may want to have access to that company. So we're looking forward to launch it sometime in September, October. So we're quite excited to see how that goes in terms of helping the equity crowdfunding ecosystem, what we call, develop much more.
Now, gentlemen, before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with before we end the conversation? I'm going to start with you, Sam.
Right. So in terms of the audience out there, be it investors or even founders who are looking to raise funding, I think the word commonly used to describe us in this particular ecosystem is alternative fundraising. I know Danny loves that particular term. Danny also knows that I hate that term.
Yes.
Because the perception for equity crowdfunding is that being alternative means that we're the last product that people look into when they think about investing. I think that was a fair reflection of the ecosystem in the first couple of years, Brian. But nowadays, I think we have become a bit more matured. Companies are now looking at equity crowdfunding as their first source of funding, not just from their own clients, customers, but also from VCs who are looking to invest in companies. So my final message to these companies is to look at equity crowdfunding as a form of viable fundraising, and for investors to invest in really growth stage company who may be able to turn your investments manifold, hopefully.
Now, thanks for that, Sam. Now over to you, Tunku Danny.
I think I want to, so to shout out to the investors, especially those from Amban or anywhere else. So if you're thinking of looking to getting a better yield than you would for the normal cash deposit rates, then look at alternative investments that you get on P2P financing or ECF, where you can barriers to entry are very low, only 50 ringgit to get in, and always diversify your risk and to invest in as many investments as you can. Never focus on one company. So come join a really growing alternative scene. that is vibrant, and at the same time you're helping the local MSMEs in the country. So it's a hashtag Kita Jaga Kita kind of vibe where we're helping other small businesses grow, and you're helping the economy overall.
Now, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's been great.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Sam Shafie, the CEO and co-founder of PitchIN, and Tunku Danny Mudzaffar, the founder and CEO of microLEAP, on BizTech's Investors Conversation Show. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.